Hi, and welcome to a special conversation with Cayuga County Sheriff Brian Schenck. My name is Joe Salzone. Sheriff, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Joe. Thanks for having me again.
It's been a long time.
Too long.
Too long. The last time we talked was right at the end of 2020, so barely a full year into the COVID-19 pandemic. How have things been since then?
It was certainly challenging during the pandemic, but things seem to be improving. My only concern is, with all of the challenges we faced during that time, I think it took a real heavy toll on certainly our community, but it also took a heavy toll on our staff as well.
How has morale been?
It's been surprisingly good considering everything that we've had to deal with over the last few years, but it is challenging. Right now we're somewhat short on staffing in our different divisions, more so in our jail than on our road patrol side of the house, but I think that has made for some extra work, long hours, some overtime, and that's been tough for our staff. But I want to commend them for stepping up, for working that overtime voluntarily in most cases, and keeping the ship moving. But I know it's put an awful strain on our staff, and it certainly does impact morale.
What's been the challenge with staffing levels? Has it been COVID? Has it been the overall attitude the public seems to have about law enforcement, or is it just the way things have turned out?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above. Maybe more so the view that the society seems to have on law enforcement right now. We've seen fewer people taking our entry-level exams, and every law enforcement agency across the country is seeing that same trend. It's harder to recruit staff. It's a little bit harder to retain staff. I think there's burnout that people are facing with lower staff numbers in our agencies, and that's certainly impacting, our ability to attract people to these careers. But, I tell people all the time still, I love the job that I do. It's been a challenging few years here recently, but I wouldn't go back and do anything different. It's a very rewarding career, and I hope that, more people start to come back and realize what a great career path this is for people, and it's a great opportunity, especially now more than ever.
When someone comes up to you and they say, "Sheriff, I would love to join your department," what's your pitch? How do you convince someone, or what do you say to someone who has that interest, not just in joining the sheriff's department, but becoming a part of law enforcement in general?
I've had that happen a number of times over the course of my career, and certainly during the term of my sheriff position here. But I actually love it when that happens. I invite them to come out to the agency and tour our agency, to meet some of our staff members, to sit down with me personally and talk about this career path. And it's not always with people that specifically want to work for our agency, but anybody that wants to possibly go into this field and is looking for a little bit of help and advice. But I love to invite people in that are looking to go down this path. I've been here for 25 years, and I didn't have that opportunity when I started. I just went and took a civil service test, and luckily was hired. But I love trying to push people in this direction. And again, it's a great career path, and it's even better yet when somebody wants to specifically work for our agency.
What are the qualities of a good deputy? What do you look for in a person, male or female, that you would want to have work for you?
Well, certainly you want somebody that has integrity, somebody that's trustworthy, somebody that's demonstrated over the course of their lifetime that they can be trusted, that that they don't get into trouble. And then for me, something that's a very important quality is I want somebody that's community oriented. I want somebody that's comfortable serving and being involved and being out there in the community, volunteering and doing things like that. So community service is paramount. We certainly enforce the law and provide public safety services, but I think it's really important that people in our positions serve the community in other ways, volunteer at different events and be willing to go out and go above and beyond to help people in their service.
What about geographically? Do you look for people that live in Cayuga County who grew up around here, or in some of the surrounding counties, or is it really just those characteristics that you mentioned that would be more important to someone joining the ranks of your department?
Yeah, certainly if somebody has the right characteristics to go into this field that we're looking for, we would welcome anybody, even if they're from out of the area. So It's great when local people wanna stay here and serve their community. That's great. But if somebody's from out of the area that has an interest too, we would certainly welcome them. And with our road patrol division, we do have take-home cars. So when we do hire somebody that serves in that division, they do have to live within the county, but they don't have to live within the county to take the exam and pursue the career field. So with the jail, we do allow our custody officers to live in neighboring counties, a contiguous county. So we do have members that work for our agency that do not live in Cayuga County. But yeah, we would really be interested in speaking to anybody that's interested in pursuing a career with our agency.
Ideally, would someone have some modicum of background in law enforcement, or might they just be fresh out of college, or maybe in some cases looking for a career change?
I've found that, there are people that may have never served in law enforcement and have no experience that are just a great fit to come start working with our agency. We certainly provide all of the training initially, so sometimes that's the best kind of candidate that we're looking for. And then other times we have had people with some law enforcement experience that have lateraled to our agency from another agency that are good fits as well. So it just depends on the person, their background and the type of person that they are.
Now, I'm sure our viewers would be fascinated to know what it takes to actually become a member of the Cayuga County Sheriff's Department, because it's not like any other job where you fill out an application, you go through 1 or 2 interviews, and then boom, you're hired, in 2 weeks you begin. It's a pretty rigid process.
It is, and I wish that we could make that a little bit more streamlined. It does take a long time, but currently our entry-level exams for our road patrol position, which would be a deputy sheriff, or for a custody officer that works in our jail, the exam's only given once a year. So I'm lobbying with our State Sheriff's Association to the State Civil Service Commission to hopefully change that so we can continuously recruit throughout the year and not just wait for one exam yearly. For a candidate that takes the exam, if they pass the exam, they're invited to take a physical agility test. They take that test. If they pass that, we invite them in for an interview. They'll be given a background packet to fill out. We do an extensive background check on them. And then we do obviously do a medical screening and a drug test and a psychological test, as well as a polygraph examination of the individual as well. So it can take quite some time, given that the test is only given once a year. And then even if somebody passes at that point, it takes quite some time to work through that process. But we have to make sure that we're going through all of those types of things to make sure that we're getting the right quality person, because these individuals are arresting people. They're using force on others. They're carrying a gun. So we have to make sure that we do all of these things to make sure that we put the right individuals into those positions.
I wonder, someone who's going through that process, they take the exam, they are able to successfully navigate through that labyrinth to get the badge and become part of your department. Do people come to you and say, boy, I didn't think it would be this hard? How do you maintain that level of motivation for someone who's going through that very lengthy process?
Well, I don't recall anyone ever saying that they didn't realize that it was to that extent. People who are serious about these career paths have generally talked with others that are already in the jobs, or they have a good idea of what it takes to go into this career field. They know what it takes to get the job initially. They know what it takes to pass a basic training academy and actually get on the job. So if somebody's serious about this career path, they pretty much know what it takes to get there and are preparing themselves for it.
Now, you mentioned, Sheriff, that you've been with the department for 25 years. I've known you for 10 or so, 12 of those years, as a matter of fact. Why did you get into law enforcement, and why have you stayed with the department?
Well, initially I really wanted to go into a career field where, and it sounds a little bit cliche, but I wanted to help people. Mm-hmm. And, I saw this as a career path to potentially do that. And at the time I was looking for something different. I saw a test announcement for the deputy sheriff's exam, and I thought, I'm going to give that a shot. I really didn't know anybody that worked in the agency or anybody that was a police officer, but I knew that looked like something I might be able to do, and it was interesting. It intrigued me. Took the test, was hired as a road patrol deputy in 1997, and and the rest is history. And I absolutely have loved every part of my career here in the different divisions and in the different things that I've done since I've been here. But it's just, I didn't have my sights set on being a sheriff in 1997. It just kind of happened, but it's just been an awesome career, and I still love the job today.
Take me back to your first day on the job, all the way back in 1997. Do you remember what was going through your head that first day?
I do remember my field training program with Deputy Tom Carbonaro. I did ride with him for a few months, but as you say that, I think back to my first day by myself, and I still clearly remember driving down the driveway here at the Public Safety Building in a marked patrol car, all by myself, going out on my first shift thinking, holy cow. Because I will tell you that as a road patrol deputy, it takes many years before you can really get truly comfortable with the different types of incidents and complaints that you handled. So here I was just a couple of months on the job after a training academy, going out there to save the world and answering that radio. And I just remember driving down the driveway thinking, wow, am I ready to do this? But it's a feeling that I'll never forget. But it worked out well for me.
I remember what life was like in 1997, simpler in a lot of ways than life in 2022. From your perspective, someone who's been there in this building for 25 years, what's changed about the job? What's changed about the approach to the job? What's changed in technology and how you might respond to a call?
There's been a lot that has changed. When you talk about technology, we're using so much more technology today to address crimes and documentation of evidence and all of the things that we do. And this might sound a little bit silly, but when I started, I didn't even have a cell phone. So I had to stop and use payphones to call back to the dispatch center if they needed me to call them. But something as simple as having a cell phone to utilize, we take them for granted today. We use them continually, but at that time we didn't even have that. But we use a lot of technology to document crime scenes. We have drones today that we're able to put up in the air instead of utilizing helicopters or waiting for them. We have forensic evidence collection equipment that just makes it so much easier to document crime scenes and take that evidence to our prosecutor. So it's been great. And I've also seen many changes in the coordination and collaboration with agencies within our community. Back when I first started, we all kind of worked in silos, and when I say that, I talk about our mental health services, and I talk about, our substance use disorder and addiction resources and people out there in that community, and, people that provided domestic violence advocacy services. We all kind of worked in silos and didn't work together, but there's been such great improvements where, we're working together in all of these coalitions and collaborations and meeting, sometimes monthly, sometimes even weekly, depending on what we're working on. But it's very rewarding to watch that transition, from the time I started to today, because we're doing such better work. And one of the challenges that has forced us to do some of those things is today we're seeing so many more issues with people struggling with their mental health, with addiction and substance use disorders. When I started in 1997, periodically I would arrest somebody that was struggling with something in that area, and we would have to try to get them some specialized help. It might be, maybe one or two individuals out of 10 that I would arrest that would be struggling with some type of issue. Today, it's much more prevalent, and it just seems to me like today that every second or third individual that we're arresting has some type of unique problem that we're trying to address from our jail or through our collaborations with people in our community. So, I've seen that problem just continue to grow and grow and grow, and the COVID pandemic didn't help that. I think we're really seeing so many more people today in crisis situations because of that has been very challenging for us to address from a law enforcement standpoint.
You mentioned mental health. In 1997, it wasn't something people talked about. Here in 2022 and in the years beyond, it's something that is seeing, thankfully, a much bigger spotlight. How did you retrain, and how did your deputies retrain themselves to recognize that there is this big issue called mental health that is finally getting much deserved attention and recognition?
Well, I think, all of our law enforcement members, much like myself, started to realize over the course of the years that we had to approach things differently. We're not trained. We don't have specialized training to deal with people in, mental health crisis situations, but now we have the tools to help us address those. And one of those tools is immediate access during the day to Cuyahoga County Mental Health. We have those resources there. And after hours today, we have access to mobile crisis services with Liberty Resources, and their team of social workers and specially trained therapists will actually come out to a scene when we're dealing with somebody in crisis after hours. So now, we don't have to rely on our law enforcement folks to try to deal with that situation without the help of somebody that has that specialized training and can address that. And in 1997, in my early years of my career, we never had those types of resources available to us. We would address somebody if they committed a crime. They might wind up in jail. They might wind up just dealing with the court system. But we just didn't have that specialized the ability to have specialized resources to address those things. And we've come a long ways. And fortunately for us, those resources are there with just the volume of cases that we're seeing today that we didn't see back in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Let's talk, Sheriff, about the perception that people have of law enforcement. It's been a couple difficult years for everybody. You go back to 2020, George Floyd, the trial of the officer responsible for his death, the Black Lives Matter movement, the riots, the protests that have gone on, the debates that have gone on for all this time. What do you think the average person thinks when they see that badge?
I think it depends partly on the area or community that you're in. I honestly feel in our community here that we have a great deal of support. I think that by and large, our community that we serve trusts our law enforcement members that are here. I'm not so sure that's the case in every community or every city across the country, but I think it's very unfortunate that there are bad officers out there and there are people that do the wrong thing. And unfortunately, over the last 2 years, those individuals have received, a lot of attention, and we haven't put the focus on all of the good things that our law enforcement people are doing out there every day. And I watched the videos relative to George Floyd, and they made me angry. I mean, nobody should ever kneel on somebody's neck like that. And it was clear that was one of those videos that, sometimes I see a controversial video regarding a law enforcement officer on the nightly news or on television, and I look at it and I think, there could be more to this. I'm not sure that we have the whole story. But when I saw that video relative to George Floyd, it was very clear to me that was wrong. And, I was very vocal about that back at the time. But unfortunately, that's what stood out to everybody, across the country. It got a lot of media attention and gave us all a black eye. But, we need to look beyond that. Police officers, yep, they're human. And, some of them out there are not doing the right thing. I think it's a small minority, but, though we can't just focus all of our attention on that. Certainly they need to be held accountable. We have to hold people accountable that wear the badge when they're not doing the right thing. I feel very strongly about that. But we also have to give credit and accolades to officers that are doing the right thing every day in a very difficult and dangerous profession, that's very hard to do.
There are people, and I'm sure you're aware of this, that for whatever reason are afraid of law enforcement or they don't trust law enforcement. There is an uneasiness, a tension. How do you get past that?
For me, I think it's incumbent upon our law enforcement members to stay engaged with the community. And I think when I talked earlier about volunteering, engaging with different events, I think it's very important that we as law enforcement officers wearing uniforms participate in community events so that children and community members can see us in a positive light. This past Saturday night, 2 of our members participated in Haunted Halloween at Falcon Park and handed out candy. And certainly we didn't have to attend that event, but I think it's important for kids and our neighbors and those that we serve to see us out there in a positive way, handing out candy, engaging with kids in our community, because there are incredibly great people that are working here at our sheriff's office and other law enforcement agencies out there that really truly care about the work that they do. They care about the people that they serve. So I think for people that are scared of members of law enforcement that may have come from, watching television or seeing something there, maybe it did come from a negative experience that they had with a law enforcement officer, but I'm hopeful that the next time they have an interaction, it's a positive one at a community event or in some other way that they can see that we that wear the badge, we really do care about this community.
What would you say is one or a couple common misconceptions that someone may have about the life and the work of a police officer?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and I see this in our schools where we have student resource officers serving in that capacity, is that we're just looking to arrest people. That's not the case. In many cases, we don't arrest people. In many cases, we're linking people with services that help them with a problem, connecting them in some way that doesn't involve a criminal arrest or a court. For me, that's a positive outcome. I don't want to always arrest people. Sometimes somebody does need to be arrested, and we have to ensure that that their conduct is that they're held accountable for their conduct. But I think a misconception, especially with our officers in schools, is that we're just looking to arrest kids or we're looking to arrest people anytime something happens. No, we're there to try to help individuals, serve our community, and sometimes ensuring public safety in our community takes a lot more than just putting handcuffs on somebody, and that's what we're trying to do.
I'm sure you've heard before, and I'll ask it here, is there a quota?
We do not have a quota, absolutely not. When it comes to traffic tickets, we do not have a quota. We don't have a quota when it comes to arrests. Certainly, I promote and ask that our people get out there and be aggressive against certain crimes like DWI. I want us to be out there aggressively enforcing the DWI laws, but we don't have a written quota, but we do push our people, hey, get out there, do some vehicle and traffic stops, try to enforce the DWI laws. So we want to take these dangerous individuals off the street, but there is no quota.
Where does that come from? The notion or the rumor or the suggestion that a police officer has some quota to fill every month. Where do you think that comes from?
I don't know if that's a television thing or if there were agencies out there back in the day that maybe they did, but it's not something that I've ever seen here at our sheriff's office. Even when I first came on the job, I've never had to, work to fill a quota, and it's not something that we've seen here. So maybe that's more of a movie thing than a reality.
Circling back a bit to 2020 and the animus that came out of that, former Governor Andrew Cuomo issued an executive order a couple months after the assault on George Floyd, calling on municipalities to reinvent, to reimagine public safety. How has it been here in Cayuga County with your department?
We did go through that process after Governor Cuomo did issue that executive order to partner with our community stakeholders to determine what our community wanted to see as far as a law enforcement agency, how they wanted us to operate. And we actually, we shook out some good things out of that process. We determined that our officers, our deputies should be wearing body-worn cameras. So our legislature fortunately helped us secure the funding to purchase body-worn cameras through that process so that we could be fully transparent. I think it's critical that all law enforcement agencies are as transparent as possible, and having those cameras are going to help us be more transparent. We're about a month away from deploying them. We don't have them deployed yet, but we do have them here, and we're just preparing to start doing some training and get those deployed. And also through that process, we identified the need to have more crisis services available to address mental health calls. Sometimes responding to a mental health crisis call with somebody in a uniform can make that situation worse. So we were looking at different strategies to have more crisis services available. And through that process, through that executive order process, we identified the need for that, and we were able to get additional resources with the help of our legislature and Cayuga County Mental Health to make that a reality. And we also developed some partnerships with some community organizations and some stakeholders that continue today. We do meet periodically and have conversations about law enforcement in our community, and that were formed as a result of that process. So I really take a lot of pride in the fact that we do partner with many individuals in our community to try to stay in touch with what our community wants in a law enforcement agency.
Are there still areas of improvement?
I think that there's always, no agency is ever going to be perfect. We can always improve. We periodically, luckily not very often, but we do receive complaints from the public about our delivery of services. We take everyone very seriously, and I have to be fully transparent. There are times when we don't get it right, and we have to make adjustments. We have to make sure that we address those issues. Sometimes, it might take some additional training, but, there's always room for improvement, and I think it's imperative that the public feel comfortable in letting us know when, hey, not only when we do a good job, but, I want to know if we're not doing the right thing so that we can fix that.
Let's go back in time a bit, Sheriff, to a time I like to call pre-COVID. Seems like a long time ago. One of the big issues regionally and county-wide was opioids, the opioid epidemic seen at the time in every corner of the United States. We don't hear about it much anymore. Has it gone away?
It hasn't gone away. Unfortunately, I think, we've just become desensitized to the fact that it's out there. When we really started to see the spike pre-COVID, as you mentioned, it really was in the headlines continually. The overdose deaths that we saw locally, the number of overdoses that we had to address, the people struggling, that hasn't gone away, but it certainly is not getting the media attention that it did back then. But unfortunately, it's still here, and it's here locally.
What is it looking like these days?
Well, I can say that, the overdose deaths this year, knock on wood, it looks like right now we're at 7 versus 19 that we had last year and 23 that we had in 2020. So overdose fatalities, we're seeing the numbers drop, knock on wood here, but we're still seeing the same consistent number of actual non-fatal overdoses. So I think that the reason we're seeing that is that I know that there's been a big push in our community, especially by the healing community study, to get more Narcan out there, life-saving medication that reverses an opiate overdose. There's been a big push to get more of that out there into our community, and I think that we're still seeing just as many or nearly as many overdoses per month as we did last year, but we're not seeing the fatalities. So, I think the good news is that Narcan is out there and it's saving lives. The bad news is it doesn't appear that the overdose numbers are dropping this year.
I recall reading an article about halfway through the pandemic, so maybe toward the end of 2021, suggesting that one of the adverse effects of the pandemic was the effects that isolation, quarantine, being stuck at home, maybe being out of work, how it may have fueled in part a greater addiction issue. But the numbers you cited, a gradual come down in the amount of overdose deaths from 2020 to 2021 to here in the waning months of 2022. What do you think your department or the area is doing right?
I think the distribution of Narcan, we've had a lot of Narcan pushed out into our community with
Do you want to explain what Narcan is?
Sure. Narcan is a medication that reverses an actual opiate overdose, and it blocks receptors in the brain that are impacted by opiates when somebody overdoses on those. So it's a reversing medication that'll reverse that almost immediately if somebody's overdosing and takes that in time or is administered the Narcan in time. So I think what we're seeing in our community is a lot of Narcan out there is saving lives. We're not seeing the fatalities, but I'm also concerned, and I certainly can't support this with any data, but I'm concerned that we're pushing so much Narcan out there that we're not hearing about some of the overdoses. I think people are utilizing the Narcan on their own, whether it be a family member, whether it be a friend, and I think that's a great thing. I think we're saving lives, but I don't think we're seeing the actual numbers that we were, the true numbers, because now we don't have people calling for emergency medical services or calling for law enforcement to respond because they're using the Narcan themselves, and unfortunately, in many cases, continuing to struggle with that. But I think it's good on one side, but I think on the other side, we don't know the extent of where we're at today. So I think it's going to take a little bit more time and a little bit more data to understand exactly what's going on in our community. But I'm glad that we're only at 7 overdose fatalities versus 19 last year, even though we're seeing the actual overdose numbers continue to trend pretty much steady as they did last year.
Where are the drugs coming from?
So the biggest issue that we have right now is with fentanyl, synthetic opiate that we are seeing popping up in all kinds of different drugs. Back when this opiate epidemic started, we were seeing a lot of people using straight heroin. Now we're seeing heroin laced with fentanyl, which is a much more deadly opiate, synthetic opiate that takes smaller amounts to actually kill somebody. But we're seeing that pop up in other drugs as well. We're seeing it in cocaine. We've seen it in marijuana. We've seen it in other drugs. And one of my big concerns with that is I think a lot of people who use some of those drugs recreationally don't realize that there's fentanyl in those drugs. We've seen it in some of our fatal overdose deaths that we've had, that there'll be multiple drugs in the individual system along with fentanyl. And it appears that fentanyl was the drug that caused them to die, but I'm concerned that they weren't using heroin or a drug that they even would have thought that there could be fentanyl in. So it really, the message to people out there that are recreationally using drugs, or maybe they're, abusing a drug that they just can't stop abusing, the message is you don't know what's in that drug. No drug is safe unless it's prescribed by a doctor and picked up at a pharmacy.
Sure.
So, one pill can be fatal if it's not a legitimate prescription pill. So I think we need to make sure people in our community are aware of that.
For someone in the throes of addiction, or someone who knows a person, there are resources available within the county. What are they?
We are very resource rich here, and I would encourage anybody that's struggling to reach out. There's a number of ways that you can do that. We do have in our lobby here at the sheriff's office on County House Road, we do have a rack that's in our lobby that anyone can walk into at any time, day or night. It's in a portion of our lobby in our vestibule that nobody's out there. You can come in discreetly and anonymously come in, pick up pamphlets that provide information about local resources that we have here. I would encourage anybody that's looking for help and doesn't feel comfortable reaching out to stop and get that information. We have a number of organizations in our community that are able to help you immediately. We have Cayuga County Mental Health that will take walk-ins during weekdays to help somebody that might be struggling not only with their mental health, but with addiction. We have Nick's Ride for Friends, which is a peer support organization that I'm actually a board member of that organization. I'm very passionate about the peer work that's going on in our community, but Nick's Ride for Friends, it's a great organization. There's peers that will help you immediately. If you reach out to them, you can walk into their center at 13 Chapel Street in Auburn, or find their phone number if you're to look that up online. There's also CHAD, Confidential Help for Alcohol and Drugs. There's a number of resources, and if you look online and you search something as simple as Cayuga addiction resources, you're going to find a lot of those that are going to pop up. And the Healing Communities Study, they're still doing some work here in our community. They've got some great information online to help those that need immediate help. But also, if it's an emergency situation, call 911 or get to the emergency room if it's a crisis situation that needs that kind of attention.
Sheriff, thanks a lot for your time.
I appreciate it. I always enjoy getting together with you, Joe.
We've been speaking with Cayuga County Sheriff Brian Schenck on ARMA. I'm Joe Salzone. Thanks for watching.